You are standing inside a Nike store. The light is clean, white, almost clinical, designed to make everything look more expensive than it is. The walls are covered with athletes frozen mid-flight, mid-sprint, mid-victory. The sneakers sit on illuminated shelves like museum pieces, each one angled, each one spotlit, each one positioned to make you feel like you are not buying a shoe. You are joining a movement. You reach for a pair of Air Jordans. They are light in your hand. The stitching is neat. The sole has a satisfying flex. You turn them over and look at the price. $250. You wince, but you think, well, they are Jordans. That is what good shoes cost. Here is what they are not telling you. The rubber sole, the synthetic upper, the foam midsole, the laces, the glue, roughly $9 in materials. The hands that cut the pattern, stitched the panels, attached the sole, and placed it in the box, about $2.75 in labor. From raw materials to finished product in a box, the total manufacturing cost of the shoe in your hand is somewhere between $15 and $25. You are paying $250 for a $20 product. But the markup is not the most interesting part of this story. Not even close. The most interesting part is where the shoe was made, who made it, and what those same people are doing right now with the skills Nike taught them. Because the factories that built Nike's empire have started building something else. Something Nike cannot control, cannot stop, and cannot compete with on price. It is coming out of a city in southern China that most people have never heard of. A city Nike helped create, and now desperately wishes did not exist. If you enjoy videos about empires hiding in plain sight, and the places quietly tearing them apart, hit like and subscribe so you never miss one. This story starts with a man selling shoes out of the trunk of his car. In the spring of 1964, a 26-year-old accountant named Phil Knight drove to a track meet in Oregon with a box of Japanese running shoes in the back of his car. The shoes came from Onitsuka Tiger, the brand most people know today as Asics. Knight had seen the factory on a world tour after Stanford Business School. He convinced Onitsuka to let him distribute the shoes in America and started selling them at track meets out of his trunk. His old track coach, Bill Bowerman, joined as partner. Bowerman was obsessed with lighter, faster shoes. He famously poured rubber into his wife's waffle iron to create a textured sole that gripped the track better than anything on the market. The company they founded was called Blue Ribbon Sports. In 1971, they renamed it Nike, after the Greek goddess of victory. That same year, Knight needed a logo. He asked a graphic design student at Portland State University named Carolyn Davidson to design one. She came up with a curved checkmark she called the swoosh. Knight was not enthusiastic. He reportedly told her, "I do not love it, but maybe it will grow on me." He paid her $35. That $35 logo now sits on one of the most recognized symbols on the planet. Nike's annual revenue is roughly $50 billion. Phil Knight's personal net worth exceeds $37 billion. And the company that started in a trunk now contracts with 785 factories across more than 40 countries. So how do you go from selling shoes out of a trunk to a $50 billion empire? The answer has very little to do with shoes. Knight understood something his competitors did not. He was not selling shoes. He was selling a feeling. The shoe was just the delivery mechanism. In 1988, Nike unleashed "Just Do It." The slogan was inspired by the last words of a convicted murderer before his execution. A piece of history Nike does not love to advertise. But the campaign changed everything. Nike stopped talking about cushioning and arch support and started talking about greatness, about overcoming obstacles, about being more than you are. Every advertisement became a short film about human potential. The shoe at the end was the ticket to get there. Then came Michael Jordan. Nike signed him in 1984 when he was a rookie for $2.5 million over 5 years. Jordan became the shoe. The Air Jordan line did not just sell sneakers. It created a culture. Kids camped outside stores overnight. In the early 90s, People were robbed, even killed, for their Jordans. A shoe became a status symbol so loaded that the wrong pair in the wrong neighborhood could get you hurt. None of that had anything to do with the shoe itself. It was entirely about what the shoe represented. Nike went on to sign Tiger Woods, LeBron James, Serena Williams, Cristiano Ronaldo, and dozens more who became inseparable from the swoosh. The company spends roughly $4 billion a year on marketing. $4 billion. More than the GDP of some small countries. More than the combined wages of every Nike factory worker on Earth. Nike spends more telling you about the shoe than it pays the people making it. That is brand economics. But here is the detail that explains everything that comes later, and most people miss it. Nike does not own a single one of those factories. Not one. Nike does not manufacture anything. It designs shoes. It markets them. It builds the brand, signs the athletes, produces the commercials, and sets the price. But the actual physical act of making the shoe, cutting the leather, stitching the panels, molding the sole, is done by contract factories Nike does not own, does not control, and can walk away from at any time. So if Nike has never owned a single factory, who is actually making the shoe? And what are those people earning while you are paying $250 for a story? 51% of Nike's footwear is made in Vietnam, 28% in Indonesia, 17% in China. Factory workers there earn between $1.50 and $4 an hour, depending on the country. The factory's gross profit on each pair of shoes is roughly 2%. A typical worker stitches and assembles 15 to 25 pairs a day, $40 to $70 for a full day in Vietnam, less in Indonesia, even less in Myanmar and Cambodia, where production has quietly shifted. This is the part of the story Nike would rather you never read. In the 90s, journalists found Nike contractors in Vietnam paying 20 cents an hour and forcing 65-hour weeks. Workers were physically punished for mistakes. Women, 80% of the workforce, reported harassment and chemical exposure. Phil Knight initially dismissed it all. Then, in 1998, cornered by public pressure, he stood at the National Press Club, admitted young girls were making his shoes in Indonesia, and promised reform. Conditions have improved. Nike now publishes its factory list and runs compliance programs. But the economics never changed. The worker still earns under $3 a pair. The shoe still sells for $250. That gap pays for everything else. The commercials, the athletes, the store lighting, the mythology that makes the markup invisible. None of this is secret. Nike publishes its factory list. Journalists and documentary crews have been inside these factories for decades. The system survives because the brand is strong enough to make you forget the math. The lights, the photographs, the waffle iron story, all of it exists to put distance between you and the hands that stitched what you hold. For 40 years, this system worked perfectly. Nike controlled the design, the brand, and the price. The factories took their 2%. The workers took their $3. Nobody challenged the arrangement, because nobody had the infrastructure to compete at Nike's scale while undercutting Nike's price. Then something happened in one city that broke the whole arrangement open. Putian. 3 million people, Fujian province, on China's southeastern coast, directly across the Taiwan Strait. In the 80s, when China opened to foreign investment, Nike, Adidas, and Puma were among the first to set up factories there. Perfect location, coastal shipping, nearby raw materials, and a huge workforce willing to work cheap. For years, Putian was just another stop on Nike's global circuit. But something happened in Putian that did not happen in Vietnam or Indonesia, at least not to the same degree. The workers learned more than their station on the line. They learned the entire process. Cutting patterns, selecting materials, formulating adhesives, molding soles, stitching uppers to Nike-grade precision. They learned quality standards and how to read design specs. Some spent 15 or 20 years inside Nike's factories, mastering every step, and then they left. They took the skills, the knowledge, the contacts, and opened their own factories, not for Nike, but to make shoes that look, perform, and are built exactly like Nike's, at a fraction of the price. The people who built Nike's empire in China no longer work for Nike. Today, Putian has over 4,200 shoe companies, employing roughly 500,000 people. The industry calls it the shoe capital. The rest of the world calls it the fake shoe capital. The saying in China's sneaker community, out of 10 fake designer shoes, 9 ship from Putian. Calling the output fake is both accurate and misleading. Accurate because the shoes carry logos and designs that belong to Nike and Adidas without permission. Misleading because the physical products are often built to the same standard, same materials, same equipment, same techniques. Top-grade Putian shoes are indistinguishable from originals without authentication gear. Same rubber, same foam, same glue. Sometimes the worker who made the replica made the original, in the factory next door. An Air Jordan 13 retails for roughly $200. The identical shoe from Putian sells for $20 to $40. Here is the number that changes everything. The authorized factory earns about $4 a pair. The Putian factory earns $30 to $40. The copy is more profitable than the original. 2% margin versus up to 36. That single fact is why Putian exists, and why no enforcement has ever shut it down. Beijing has tried. Since 2014, authorities have staged repeated crackdowns. Factories raided, inventory seized, operators fined and sometimes jailed. In one raid, police seized enough fakes to fill warehouses, and state television broadcast it all. The industry kept coming back, because an owner earns more in a month making copies than in a year as a Nike contractor. Until that math changes, no raid will matter. There is a cultural side too. In China and increasingly beyond, consumers are asking why a logo should cost $200. A generation raised on YouTube comparisons of replicas versus originals, zooming in on stitching, finding the differences negligible, does not carry their parents' reverence for Western brands. They have seen the factory floor. The magic trick fails when the audience knows how it is done. Online replica communities number in the millions. Subreddits, Discord servers, and WeChat groups trade factory contacts, quality reviews, shipping tips. Watch their language. They do not say fake. They say reps, short for replicas, a word that strips out the moral judgment and makes the purchase a rational choice. Same shoe, the label is the difference. For a growing number of buyers, the label is not worth $220. So the copycats have solved the price problem. But here is the question nobody asked. What happens when a city stops copying the giants and starts replacing them? Putian is not the only city in Fujian that learned shoemaking. Just down the coast sits Xinjiang. Same factories, same skills, same proximity to Nike's supply chain. But instead of copying Western brands, Xinjiang built its own. Anta, Li Ning, 361 degrees, Peak, Xtep, Chinese brands founded by entrepreneurs from the same factory ecosystem as Putian. Here is what most people will never hear. Anta is now the largest sportswear company in China by revenue. In 2022, it passed Adidas in the Chinese market, and has kept pulling away since. Revenue exceeded 60 billion yuan in 2024, roughly $8.5 billion. And that is only what Anta itself sells. It bought the Chinese operations of Fila and turned a failing label into one of the country's hottest fashion brands. In 2019, it acquired the Finnish conglomerate Amer Sports, owner of Salomon, Arc'teryx, and Wilson. A company that started making running shoes in a Xinjiang workshop now owns some of the most prestigious sports brands in the Western world. Let that sit. Li Ning is an even more remarkable story. The brand is named for one of the most decorated gymnasts in Olympic history. 6 medals at the 1984 Los Angeles Games. Torchlighter at the 2008 Beijing Olympics. He launched his own sportswear brand in 1990. For years, it was a budget alternative to Nike. Then came reinvention. In 2018, Li Ning showed at New York Fashion Week, fusing Chinese calligraphy and cultural motifs with modern streetwear. It went viral overnight. The brand jumped from budget shelf to fashion front row in a single season. Young Chinese consumers, primed by the Guochao movement, embraced it. Guochao, roughly, national tide, is the cultural wave in which Chinese shoppers actively prefer domestic brands. Not for price, for identity. Wearing Li Ning became a statement. I am Chinese. I am proud of Chinese design. I do not need a Western logo. Watch the data move. In 2015, Nike held roughly 30% of China's sportswear market. By 2025, around 20%. Over the same period, Anta grew from 10 to over 20%. Li Ning, 361, Peak, and Xtep together hold another 15 to 20. The domestic brands are not just competing anymore. They are winning. The quality gap has essentially closed. The reviewers who once dismissed Chinese shoes as inferior copies now rate Anta and Li Ning models alongside Nike and Adidas. In some categories, basketball shoes, running shoes built for Asian foot shapes, Chinese brands score higher. That gap is widening as this video plays. Every upgraded Putian factory, every viral Li Ning design, every Anta shoe that outperforms a Nike on court. That is market share leaving the swoosh, not through raids or lawsuits, through something far harder to fight. Better products at better prices. This is what Nike trained its own replacement to do. By opening factories in Fujian in the 80s, Nike handed decades of shoemaking knowledge to a workforce that eventually used it to compete with Nike directly. The factories that made Nike's shoes now make the shoes eating Nike's share. The skills Nike's supply chain built are now the edge of Nike's biggest rivals. Phil Knight sold shoes from his trunk because he believed he could beat the established brands on value. He was right. The $35 swoosh he did not love became the symbol of a $50 billion company. Now the same logic, comparable quality, better price, is being used against him by a city of 4,000 factories Nike helped build. Nike will not vanish tomorrow. The brand runs too deep. Endorsements, emotion, millions of loyalists. There will always be buyers who want the swoosh and will pay $250 for it. But for a growing number, the question gets harder to ignore. If the identical shoe, same materials, same workers, same techniques, costs $20 instead of $250, what exactly are you paying for? The answer is not technology. It is not quality. It is not innovation. It is a curved checkmark, designed by a college student in 1971 for $35. That is what costs $230. Now let us go back to where we started. You are back in the Nike store. White lighting, athlete photos, illuminated shelves, the Air Jordans in your hand, $250. Now you know the shoe cost $20 to make. You know the worker earned less than $3. You know 4,000 factories in Putian make the same shoe for a fifth of the price. You know the brands from the factory next door, Anta, Li Ning, 361, are eating Nike's market share in the biggest consumer market on earth. You know the swoosh cost $35, and the designer was not even sure it was good. You can still buy them. They look great, they feel great, and when you walk out of the store wearing them, nobody will know or care what they cost to make. That is the power of a brand. It makes the math disappear. But now you have seen the math, and math, unlike logos, does not fade. So, the question for the comments. Knowing all of this, the $20 cost, the $2.75 worker, the identical shoe next door for a fraction of the price, would you still buy the originals? Or is the label still worth $230? No wrong answers. I genuinely want to know where you land. If this changed how you see the sneakers on your feet, hit like. It helps people find the math. Subscribe and turn on notifications. The next video follows the same trail to another empire hiding in plain sight. It starts with a factory that used to build engines for a company you definitely know, and what it builds now. You do not want to miss it.